So as I said, I teach computer science for a living, but exploration is my hobby. In fact, I just completed a tour around the sun. I completed it today. It took me a whole year. And today is my birthday. So that's a very special day for me. And it so happens that I also begin teaching in this semester right on this day. So that's a good omen. I do my explorations normally on a mountain bike, and we'll talk about it at some point during the course. But I also read numerous books about explorations and became an explorations fan. And I feel that through exploration, I managed to connect to some of the most remarkable and exciting people and events that shape the world as we know it. And my goal in this course is to share with you both the passion and the knowledge that I acquired about the art of exploration. And I also think that this course is the ultimate escape from our life these days under Corona. And yet, in many ways, it is relevant to our current life because this course is about hope and optimism and courage and heroes and fantastic achievements and perspective. So I think that once you get to know our protagonists, our heroes in this course, you will understand very well what I'm talking about. Now, exploration is an interesting world.
שמעון, קפאת פתאום.
Your conventional wisdom and explore. And, you know, discovery is also an interesting.
You keep on freezing.
It's not only me?
So this course indeed is about discovery and exploration. Now, let me try to connect to my PowerPoint. So this will take me a minute. Hold on a minute, bear with me. And I'll share my screen.
Shimon, you have a problem with the internet. You're cut on and off.
Would be best if everyone closed their video so we have a higher bandwidth.
Yeah, let's try to do that. Let's try to turn off all your video cameras and also unmute your microphones. And let me also connect to the lecture from my cell phone just to make sure that things are working properly. So, a minute. Okay, so the objectives of this course is to once again join some great adventures that took place during the last
Again, you're cut.
books. And the way we're going to do it is we'll meet here once a week for about an hour and a half and go through this lecture. But no less important than this, I would like you to also read the texts that I will put in the course websites You'll have to read about 50 pages roughly each week. The reading is quite fascinating, so I think you will enjoy. Of both the quizzes and the final exam that hopefully we'll do in the campus at the end of the semester. And the language of instruction, obviously, is English. Now, I'm skipping through some slides. And, you know, why do people explore? Well, here's a quote from Saint-Exupéry, who said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, don't divide the work and give order. Instead, teach the men or the women to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So human spirit is extremely important. Curiosity is extremely important. This was written by Saint-Exupéry, who was a pilot, both a commercial pilot and a military pilot, and also a wonderful author who wrote The Little Prince, Anasich HaKatan. Maybe you read it as a child. And he knew something about explorations. In fact, he got killed during one of his flights during World War II. And luckily, he managed to write some wonderful books before he died. Why do scientists explore? Well, here's another interesting quote. Why do scientists persist in their investigations, struggle so desperately for every bit of knowledge, stay up nights seeking the answer to a problem, climb the steepest obstacles to the next fragment of understanding? We do it to finally reach the joyous moment of the kick of the discovery, which is part of the pleasure of finding things out. We don't do science for the glory or for the awards or the prizes. We do it for the fun of it. Of finding things out, how the world works, and what makes it tick. So this was said by Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists that ever worked. And Feynman also wrote this wonderful book, which I highly recommend if you ever have books, which will give you a nice reading plan for the next 10, 20 years. So let's talk more about exploration. This is a picture of the Beagle, which is the ship in which Darwin traveled around the world. And here we see the Beagle going through Magellan Straits, which is the channel that separates Patagonia from Tierra del Fuego in the very south tip of South America. And here we see Magellan himself going through the same strait about 200 years before Darwin. And, you know, these are two explorers that made the same incredible trip around the world, but they did it for two very different motivations. Darwin's trip was made mostly for scientific.
Being cut off again. You freeze. Can't hear you.
Shimon, you cut every about 3 minutes for 1 minute. It's hard to listen this way.
Everyone should mute. Simon, perhaps you should turn off your video. It could help bring some.
Maybe switch to 4G, to hotspot on your phone. It's network, maybe it's better.
So I hope that people hear me now.
Yes.
1, 2. If you hear me, please raise your hand.
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Get used to it. Not much that I can do about it. Okay, so we talked about a little bit about Darwin and Magellan. I hope that you heard me. And here we see Darwin going through Magellan Strait, and here we see Magellan himself in his Trinidad ship, leading an armada of ships going through the same strait 200 years before Darwin. And as you see, people explore for many different reasons. So Magellan wanted to find a connection between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And this was the main purpose of his exploration, which was both for commercial and political reasons. And Darwin, of course, traveled for scientific and intellectual objectives. And, but, you know, people also do explorations for all sorts of personal reasons. And they take tremendous personal risks in order to explore new territories. So, you know, for me, this course is also has something to do with risk taking, because once again, exploration is something that puts you outside your comfort zone. You know, I'm not supposed to teach a course about exploration. I'm supposed to teach a course about courses about computer science. And many of the students who take this course are not supposed to study in Israel. They can study in America or in Europe, but they chose to once again go out and explore and try to do something new. And so there are all sorts of personal explorations, and I think that once we see, or join some of these great explorers and some of these fantastic stories, you will be transformed in some way, as I hope I will be also. Now, exploration is also about leadership and about character and about reporting. When you go to the South Pole, you have to travel about 3,000 kilometers in 4 months in some of the most remote and desolate and forbidding place on the earth. And you have, once again, exactly 4 months or the summer to do it, and there's no margin for error. When you explore in the times of Magellan in the 15th century, for every 7 ships that left Europe, only 1 returned. So just think about the odds of making it safely to the end. So you have to lead and motivate people under very harsh circumstances. And in order to do it, you have to have a genius for leadership and a genius for organization and logistics and planning. So exploration and leadership go hand in hand. Now, exploration is also about reporting. And I'm sure you heard about the Iliad and the Odyssey. And in the Iliad, there's a very nice dialogue between Achilles, who is one of the heroes, one of the Greek heroes who went to Troy, and his teacher. The name of Achilles' teacher was Phoenix. And Phoenix tells Achilles that, he says, your father hired me to teach you to be a speaker of words and a doer of deeds. And so these 2 virtues, doing and speaking, they capture precisely, I think, the Greek notion of virtue, to be both the speaker of words and the doer of deeds. And this is also the vision that I have for this course. We will join some great heroes and some great explorations, people who made fantastic achievements, but also in doing so, we will pay equal attention to the words and the texts that these people wrote along their explorations. Because if you want to be remembered as an explorer, you have to be not only successful in what you do, you also have to describe, to be able to describe what you did. And, there are some wonderful explorers and scientists that could not communicate well, and therefore the world today is not aware of their achievements. And on the other extreme, there are wonderful storytellers who didn't really achieve much. For example, Frederick Cook wrote a fantastic story about reaching the North Pole. And the story was incredible, except for one little detail: he didn't really reach the North Pole. So once again, it is very unique to have a person who is both a great leader and a great explorer, and also happens to be a great writer. So Darwin is probably the quintessential example of someone who had these 2 character traits, or these 2 skills. I want to connect to one more thing from the Iliad and the Odyssey, written, as I'm sure you know, by Homer, or in Hebrew we say Homerus. What we see here is the Aegean Sea. We see Troy and Ithaca. And one of the Greek heroes who went to Troy to fight in Troy was Odysseus. And Odysseus left his wife, Penelope, in Ithaca, and traveled all the way to Troy with thousands of other Greeks. They fought the war, they conquered Troy, and then Odysseus starts his trip back home to Ithaca. And this is a very treacherous way, full of adventures. And along the way, he had to fight with cyclops and Lystrogenians and all sorts of monsters. And Poseidon, the god of the sea, also gave him lots of troubles. And so Homerus wrote yet another book called the Odyssey about this epic travel. And about 100 years ago, a modern poet by the name of Cavafy, a wonderful Greek poet, wrote a poem about going back to Ithaca. So I will try to read it to you, hoping that once again we won't have too many distractions. But if we do have distractions, just for the record, you have copies of all my slides and you can always go through them later on. So when you set out on your journey back home to Ithaca, pray that the road is long. Now that's a contradiction, right? Pray that the road is long, full of adventure, full of knowledge. The Lystrogenians and the Cyclops, the angry Poseidon, do not fear them. You will never find such as these on your path if your thoughts remain lofty, if a fine emotion touches your spirit and your body. The Lystrogenians and the Cyclops, all these monsters, the fierce Poseidon, you will never encounter if you do not carry them within your soul. If your soul does not set them up before you. Pray that the road is long, that the summer mornings are many, when with such pleasure, with such joy, you will enter ports seen for the first time, stop at Phoenician markets, and purchase fine merchandise, mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, and sensual perfumes of all kinds. As many sensual perfumes as you can. Visit many Egyptian cities to learn and learn from scholars. Always keep Ithaca in your mind. To arrive there is your ultimate goal, but do not hurry the voyage at all. It is better to let it last for many years and to anchor at the island when you're old, rich with all you have gained on the way, not expecting that Ithaca will offer you any riches. Ithaca has given you the beautiful voyage. Without her, you would have never set out on the road. She has nothing more to give you. And if you find her poor, Ithaca has not deceived you. Wise as you have become, with so much experience, you must already have understood what Ithaca means. So this, I think, is a most wonderful poem about the fact that the journey is much more important than the destination. And in fact, in teaching this course, you have to realize that indeed, most of the focus is on the journey. Now, let me give you an example. Today, we will start talking about going to the South Pole. The South Pole is nothing. It's a point somewhere on the ice, which is completely undistinguished. You know, there's no flag that says you arrived to the South Pole. It's just a point. And yet, the point is not to get to the point, but rather how you do it, how you manage yourself, how you lead your people, how you deal with all the problems along the way. That's the most important part of the exploration. So here's the course plan. We'll start with 3 lectures about polar explorations, about going to the North Pole and the South Pole. We'll talk about Scott, Amundsen, Shackleton, Nansen, the greatest polar explorations as we know it. Then we'll have 3 more fantastic geographical explorations, Magellan, Lewis and Clark, and Darwin. And with Darwin, we roughly end the first half of the course in which we talk about geographical exploration. And we start the second part of the course in which we'll discuss intellectual and scientific explorations. So Darwin discovered the secret of life. but he did not understand how evolution works. He just discovered it. It took people like Watson and Crick and Rosalind Franklin to actually crack the secret and discover the structure of DNA, something which is very relevant to what we are undergoing today. So we'll talk about Watson and Crick, life science. We'll talk about scientific explorations, mathematical explorations. We'll talk about geometry, algebra. We'll talk about the infinite and the connection between science, religion, as we can evaluate it through the notion of the infinite. And then we'll have 3 more lectures about quote unquote general subjects like democracy, like religion, and some personal perspective on exploration. Now, obviously, this is just a very small sample, ridiculously small sample of interesting explorations and interesting chapters in history. So roughly, that's the plan. And with that, let me say a few words about administration. We have a website in which I'm going to put all my slides, and I will do it ahead of the lecture. But normally I revise the slides until the very last minute. So if you want to have a fresh copy of your lecture, I suggest that you do it in the morning of Wednesday, just before the lecture. The lecture or the course is mostly about me sitting here and giving you lectures and you hopefully enjoying them, and some reading that I'm going to put in the website and you're supposed to read. Remember, there may be some surprise quizzes about those readings. I will figure out some technology to make it happen. There will be a final exam at the end of the course. And there's also something that I call my exploration. You know, I think that every one of you guys has experienced some, you know, tremendous feeling of discovery or understanding, or some exquisite place that you visited, or a great book that you wrote, that you read, something that you think changed your life in some way. And if you want to talk about it, I'll be delighted to give you the stage. So, you know, we won't have a lot of time for this, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, but if you want to share your exploratory experiences with the rest of the class, send me email and we'll try to set it up. So with that, once again, that's the course plan, and we are now beginning the first roughly a third of the course, and I'll give you a crash course in polar exploration. So let me switch my notes. Now, around 1900, about 120 years ago, reaching the South Pole and the North Pole was like going to the moon. It was considered the greatest breakthrough that young men could possibly dream about. So some of the best and most qualified explorers have set themselves to achieve this this goal. And before we get into the specifics of how you do it, I want to share with you something about the spirit of exploration. So I want to read to you some entries that were written by a great explorer. And here's what he wrote. October 31st, we have good wind for the mill, the Chanat Ruach, and the electric lamps burn all day. The lamp under the skylight makes us forget the want of sun. Oh, light is a glorious thing, and life is fair in spite of all they. And we had a revolver practice in the morning. In the evening, we had a magnificent 5-course dinner: chicken soup, boiled mackerel, reindeer ribs with baked potatoes, macaroni pudding, pears with milk, and Regan's ale, beer to wash it all down. And then a few days later, a great race on the ice was advertised for today. The course was measured, marked, and decorated with flags. The cook prepared the prizes, 3 cakes, numbered and properly graduated in size. First place, second place, third place. And then how the days pass quickly. I work, read, think, and dream, strum a little on the organ, and go for a walk on the ice. You know, it sounds like these words were written in Club Med or some fantastic vacation destination. In fact, they were written inside this ship that was stuck in the ice for 8 months. And here we see the men playing on the ice next to the ship. This journal, this story, was written by Nansen, perhaps the first great modern polar explorer. And Nansen had made an epic trip to the North Pole. He didn't make it quite to the pole, but he made what is known as sort of a world record. He made it 500 kilometers from the North Pole, and these records are considered, or they are named farthest north. He managed to go as close to the pole as anyone before him. And we'll have more to say about Nansen later on in this lecture. Let me switch completely our perspective and go to the South Pole instead. In many ways, the South Pole is much more interesting than the North Pole. First of all, it's really like going to the moon because it's so far away. The South Pole is about 20,000 kilometers from Oslo. The North Pole is only about 2,000 kilometers from Oslo. So for a Norwegian explorer like Amundsen, going to the South Pole is more exciting than going to the North. Now, Antarctica is a huge continent. And just to give you a feeling of the dimensions, what you see here is Australia and New Zealand superimposed on the Antarctica map. So as you can see, Antarctica is about twice as large as Australia. Now, how do you get to Antarctica 120 years ago? Well, you get into your wooden sailboat, which may have a steam engine to help it sail along. And you leave London or Portsmouth or Oslo, and you travel for about 18,000 kilometers all the way to New Zealand. It will take you several months to get there. And then from New Zealand, you make the last trip to the ice shelf in Antarctica. You can also go from Argentina. If you look at this map, you will see New Zealand at the south and Argentina in the west. Although around these areas, directions don't mean much, but at least on the map, you know, for orientation, there is a meaning. So you can go from Tierra del Fuego or from New Zealand, and yet it's much easier to go from New Zealand because the sea that connects New Zealand to Antarctica is much more friendly and navigable than the Weddell Sea that connects Argentina and the north part of Antarctica. So normally people would travel to New Zealand and then they will try to reach Antarctica from there. So you travel to New Zealand and then you get into the Peck ice, which is a belt of ice that surrounds Antarctica, surrounds the Arctic Circle, and your ship starts to go through the ice. And as you do it, the temperature drops all the time. And then at some point, you get into packed ice, which you somehow have to pass. So if you're a good captain, and bear in mind that these ships many times have to go only on sails because you have to conserve your fuel. You have to somehow navigate your ship through these leads of water and hope to, get out of the pack and into the open sea that we see in the picture here in the horizon. So hopefully you make it through these leads, because if you're out of luck, or if the winter is closing in on you, at some point, the whole ocean is going to freeze around you. And this is a very unfortunate event, because your ship is made of wood. And when the sea freezes around you, what happens is a phenomena called pressure. And pressure happens when underwater currents move the ice flows, they move them around, and they create what is known as pressure ridges, or sort of walls of icebergs that close on the ship from different sides. And at some point, the ship simply begins to break down under the pressure. So this is, quite an unfortunate thing to happen when you are, 18,000 kilometers away from civilization. But one lecture in this course, our third lecture about Shackleton, will talk about precisely something that happened in this spirit. Shackleton lost his ship and somehow managed to get out of there, and the story will be told in due course later on. So you have to avoid this at all costs. Now, how do you do it in terms of time? Well, in these areas, every year, there are only 4 months in which you can travel. These are the summer months. And then you have 8 months of complete darkness and frozen and solid frozen ice. So you must do it in the summer. So you try to get to this area known as the Ross Sea. And let me sort of zoom in on it. So now I changed the orientation of the map, okay? And we are coming from the north. And the the Ross Sea is a sea that during wintertime freezes and becomes part of the continent. So once again, you try to make as much distance as you can through this ice pack before everything freezes on you. And then you get to a point which is called, today it's called Ross Island, which is a very special place. And Ross Island is a small island that has two volcanoes on it. One is called Erebus, and the other one is called Mount Terror and Mount Erebus. And here we see Erebus. And during the summer, Ross Island is an island, but once winter sets in, it once again becomes connected to the mainland. So it's a very good place to land, because you can get there by sea, by your ship, and then you get out and the people can start, when the time comes, they can start the journey to the South Pole. Here's a picture of Mount Erebus. It's about 3,000 meters high, so it's a nice hill. And it's an active volcano. So it also serves as a great landmark. You can just imagine when you go in the ship and all of a sudden you see, the smoke coming out from Erebus, you know that you're in the right direction and you've reached the right destination. And going back to Ross Island, I want to zoom in on yet another place called McMurdo Bay, which is the actual point where you're going to land the mission. Before that, let me show you a picture of what is known as the ice shelf. You see, if you're a captain going to Antarctica, you cannot just land anywhere you want, because Antarctica is bordered with this ice shelf, which is about 100 meters high. So this is like a third of the region. And and we see the relative height of your ship compared to the height of the ice shelf. So the only thing that you can do as a captain is to, close in as close as you can to this ice shelf, and then you begin to hug it and sail until you find an opening. You need some opening in order to land the people, and there are not too many openings. You can sail for 300 kilometers before you find a place where you can actually land your people. So that's the first challenge, to find a good landing point. And McMurdo Bay, which I pointed before on the map, is one of these very rare places where you can actually park your boat and get the people out on the land. Now, let me say a few words about the destination. Before we go back to the ship, where do we want to go? We want to go to the South Pole. And what you see here are the temperatures in this place, which are quite unbelievable. The warmest day that you can hope for is going to be something like minus 25 degrees. That's the warmest time, and it happens during the summertime. And during the rest of the year, the place is completely frozen, and temperatures drop down to 60 degrees below zero. The place is also shrouded in complete darkness, 8 months out of the year. And the sun during the summer, you can, don't get excited from the summer, because even during the summer, the sun reaches only about 23 degrees above the horizon. So this is a very minimal, very meager summer. Now, no animal, no plant, no any form of bacteria or virus exists in 1,000 kilometers perimeters around the pole. It's once again the most lonely, desolate, isolated place that you can possibly think of. That's the destination. So how do you get to the pole? Well, first of all, you travel to New Zealand. Then you spend the summer to go through the sea and reach the ice shelf. And the captain has to put the people, the mission on the ground and get the hell out of there, because if he will not be quick enough, he's going to be stuck in the ice on his way back. So the captain has a very small window of opportunity. He has 2 months to get to the Antarctica and 2 months to get out. So you put your mission, your people, your expedition on the ground, and then winter closes in. So you have to spend 8 months at the point where you landed and wait for the next summer. And when the next summer comes, you set out and make your trial to get to the pole. And getting to the pole, this is what you see here is McMurdo Bay. Getting to the pole is a 1,300 kilometers trip. And once you get there, you have to turn around and go back. And just like the window of opportunity that the captain had, you have exactly 4 months to do it. So you make a dash to the pole. You have to somehow progress about 30, 40 kilometers every day. Otherwise, you're doomed. You're not going to make it. And then you have to make, equal progress going back. And if you're lucky, when you get back, you will find the ship waiting for you. But if you're late, you'll have to spend another year on the ice before you will see the next ship coming to rescue you. So altogether, we're talking about a trip that lasts anything between 2 to 3 years. And so this is sort of the grand plan that you have to deal with. Now, winter camp is extremely important. What we see here is a famous hut that was built by Captain Scott and was then used by many other explorers. And this is McMurdo Bay. And the location of your winter camp is terribly important because it has to have access both to ships that come to pick you up and bring maybe more supplies. And it also has to be well located as a point of departure to the pole. It has to have access to game for hunting and fresh food, seals, bears, and other sources of fresh food. And it has to be also a good place from which you can send expeditions to do reconnaissance, to collect intelligence, information about where you are and how you're going to begin the trip to the pole. Now, you have to spend 8 months in this winter camp, and the only way to stay sane and not get crazy in these 8 months of complete darkness and isolation and tremendous cold weather, the only way to survive is to keep your men busy all the time. So one of the great secrets of successful explorations were bringing with you all the supplies that you need in order to build the equipment that you will actually use on the ice. So these people did not bring with them, for example, sleeping bags. They actually made their own sleeping bags from supplies that they brought with them and from furs from animals that they hunted around the winter camp. They didn't bring assembled sledges, mizchalot. They built them themselves. They didn't bring too much clothing because they sewed their clothing themselves. What we see here in this picture is the Amundsen expedition sewing or creating some pieces or articles of clothing and parkas and so on. And here we see another picture of two members actually of the Scott expedition, creating the sleeping bag. So self-sufficiency is incredibly important. It's incredibly important for many different reasons. First of all, to keep people busy, because they have 8 months to spend on the ice. Second of all, if you're going to make your own coats and your own boots and your own socks and everything, believe me, they are going to be of the highest possible quality, okay? And also you have to understand that the people who go to these missions are not regular people. They are very highly skilled artisans. So you have people who know how to handle furs. You have people who know how to handle ironworks. You have fantastic carpenters. You have the best doctors that you can hope to have. And these people, once again, are artists in their own domains, and they build little shops in the winter camp. And in these little shops, they build everything, so that not only the equipment will be of the highest possible quality, also if something breaks down 1,000 kilometers from home, you will know how to fix it. So self-sufficiency is a very important, or used to be a very important characteristics of early explorations. Now, I want to talk about several elements of technique that we have to be aware of before we start sort of immersing ourselves in the actual stories. So I want to talk about navigation, traction, sledging, clothing, shelter, and food. So let's start with navigation. Well, first of all, just a few key concepts. When you look at Earth, the Earth revolves around an imaginary axis, and the axis penetrates the Earth from the North Pole and goes all the way down to the South Pole. And then we have the equator, another imaginary point of latitude or kav rochav around the globe. And we know how to measure how far we are going north or south from the equator. There are tools like sextants, I will show it in a minute, that help you evaluate with great precision where you are with respect to the equator. So you can actually tell how close you are to the pole. Now, the pole is also divided by imaginary lines of longitude. And unfortunately, we don't, or back then, explorers didn't have good means to evaluate where they were on the globe with respect to longitude. I may spend more time during the course explaining this, this problem, but once again, these things are very sort of asymmetric. We know very well where we are with respect to south and north, and we cannot tell very well where we are in terms of east and west. Now, the North Pole is located in latitude 90 north, the South Pole 90 south. The Arctic circles begin around 75 degrees. Anything, from 75 to 90 is considered Arctic terrain. And interestingly enough, once you get closer and closer to the pole, longitude is no longer significant because, around the North Pole or around the South Pole, all roads, so to speak, lead to the pole itself. And so in that respect, the South Pole and the North Pole are completely symmetric. So the tools that people used back then to measure where they were with respect to the equator were mostly sextants. And the sextant, as you can see at the top left of the screen here, is a gadget that enables you to measure the height of the sun above the horizon. And if you're in the equator, then during noontime, sun will be exactly in zenith, on top of your head. And as you go north or as you go south, during noontime, the sun, gets closer and closer to the horizon. So once again, you can measure this difference between the sun and the horizon and tell with great precision where you are. And so we see on the right of this slide, we see an explorer with a sextant mounted on Chatzuba. What is Chatzuba? I have to pick it up.
Tripod.
And tripod, thank you. Tripod. And at the bottom, we see, it looks like a compass, but it's not a compass. It's a watch or a timepiece. Compass, by the way, is completely useless around the pole because the magnetic field there is crazy and the compass keeps on rotating. But you also have this timepiece. And if you look at the bottom right of the slide, you'll see something very interesting. You see the sledge, and at the end of the sledge, you see a bicycle wheel with a harness, which is sort of yoked, connected to the sledge. And this wheel is a distance meter. So as you make progress, the wheel turns around, and you can tell how many miles or how many kilometers you covered during the day. So this and the timepiece and the sextant are the tools that people used in order to figure out where they were vis-a-vis the North Pole or the South Pole. Moving along, let's talk about traction. Now, how do you move in the snow? Well, you can either ski or walk or sledge or crawl, but somehow you have to make progress. Now, the best way to make progress in this terrain is cross-country skiing. And this was an art that was very well understood by the Norwegians and was completely misunderstood by the British back then. So some explorers were, more successful than others because they had better technology. And another very important way to move your equipment is, of course, dogs. And we're talking about Eskimo dogs, and these are, ferocious working animals. You have to know how to manage your dogs. Normally, 10 people will be accompanied by about 50 dogs who would carry the sledges. And the dogs are, as I said, they are very wild animals, and you have to know how to lead them, which is also an art that some people knew and some people did not understand. For example, dogs never make progress in the same pace as humans, because the dog normally trots. Dogs trot around, and trotting is quicker than walking and slower than running. It's a crazy pace to keep for a man that tries to sort of run after the trotting dogs. So if you understand it, you go with the flow and you adjust yourself to the pace of the dogs. And there are ways to do it. And there are people who were masters of dogs and knew how to do it. And if you don't know how to handle the dogs, it can drive you crazy, and you will drive the dogs crazy. So there's a lots of knowledge, all sorts of very esoteric knowledge that has to be acquired in order to survive on the ice. Now, if some people had fantasies that you can also use horses and ponies on the ice, and the British brought with them on the ships some dozen poor ponies, and unfortunately the ponies died several weeks after they started the journey to the pole. At least they provided a good supply of meat, but they couldn't make any progress with the ponies. So at the end, when nothing helps, if you don't know how to ski, if you don't know how to handle dogs, if the ponies died on you, the only thing that remains is something called manhauling. And manhauling is to put a harness on yourself, connect your sledge to the harness, and start plowing through the ice, through the snow, exerting, incredible energy and requiring fantastic stamina. So we'll see this happening later on in the course. Actually, next week, you start very optimistically with the ponies, and then you end up manhauling and fighting for your life. So we talked about the dogs. Here's a nice quote. "One cannot think of anything more determined and tenacious than the Eskimo dog. Its capacity as a draught, as a work animal, and stamina are absolutely astonishing. When in addition there is a great intelligence and devotion to its master, one can understand what importance it has for modern polar exploration." This was written by Nansen. And once again, the Norwegians understood it very well. the British, surprisingly, were very suspicious of dogs, and they, especially Scott, the British leader, didn't think that dogs can be useful on the ice. So, well, he learned the hard way that unfortunately was mistaken. The dogs are not only work animals, they also provide endless source of amusement and routine help and work for the men. The dogs stay with you for 3 years, so there are lots of deliveries going on, and you see puppies and more generations of dogs, and they become a very important part of the expedition, both in terms of work, but also as a psychological diversion. So dogs are terribly important. Clothing, obviously, is critically important. And what we see in this picture is a very interesting difference between Norwegian clothing and British clothing. Now, by the way, the reason I'm stuck with Norway and England is because these were the two countries that actually planned and executed expeditions to the South Pole and also to the North Pole during this time. I'm sorry, America was another country that initiated some expeditions to the North Pole. But when it comes to the South Pole, it was almost exclusively a British and Norwegian competition. And what happened in this competition is something we'll discuss next week. But for now, we begin to see differences. And what you see on the left is Amundsen, the leader of the Norwegian expedition. And Amundsen is wearing furs. And that's what you want to wear when you're on the ice. Because in contrast, the British folks that you see at the top right and also at the bottom right is Captain Scott himself. They didn't wear furs. They put on themselves all sorts of garments that were made from wool, believe it or not, wool, and something called gabardine. It's a terrible substance because on the one hand, it warms you up, but at the same time, it absorbs water and it becomes terribly heavy and it scratches your skin in a terrible way. And it's really almost the worst thing that you can hope to wear in such a place. And yet, the British, didn't think about it too deeply. That's what they used to wear back in Europe, so they took it with them to the pole also. So they suffered badly. Moving along, shelter is obviously critically important because you make progress during the day and then you get into your shelter. Now, the British counted on tents. So they had very nice tents and covers that they would put around the tent. But as you can imagine, a tent is not a great source of isolation. You can easily freeze inside the tent, especially in old tents like this. So once again, this was a very bad choice of shelter technology. The Norwegians, on the other hand, also used tents every once in a while, but they also built igloos. And you can build an igloo in 2 or 3 hours of work, or maybe in 1 hour if you're very skilled, and the igloo provides a fantastic shelter. Diet, obviously, is terribly important because you're going to exert, many thousands of calories every day, and you have to somehow bring it back to your body. So you're going to take with you to the pole. What you see here is the typical diet. First of all, many hundreds of kilograms of seal meat. And this is smoked meat that you prepared when you wintered in the camp, remember when you spent 8-month wintering, well, you kill hundreds of seals during this time, and you smoke their meat, and you use the skin to prepare sleeping bags and so on. Chocolate, raisins, biscuits, butter. You need butter because butter is something you're going to use in order to cook the meat of the seals if you want to have a hot meal. Pemmican, which in Hebrew we call it loof, canned meat, and tea, which is terribly important because you have to drink tea every day. If you don't have a certain point of time in which you sit down and take out your burner and the primus or whatever you want to call it and prepares a hot cup of tea, you're dead. You have to have your tea every day. Lemon is also very important, and I'm talking about lemon juice or lemon extract. It's important because this diet is very unhealthy to your body, and there is no source of vitamin C in any one of the things that you see here. So in order to give your body the vitamin C that it craves in such conditions, and also in normal conditions, the best way to do it is just to drink fresh lemon juice. And if you will not do it, you're going to fall prey to a terrible illness known as scurvy, or in Hebrew, safedet. If you get scurvy, in a few days, your teeth begin to fall down, your gums begin to inflate, you're going to suffer from very high fever, and you can die in a week or two. And yet, if you will just take a few sips of lemon juice, you'll get completely healed. So this is like a miracle prevention to scurvy. Fuel and lighting are obviously very important, not only to eat decently, but also to drink, because you see, there are trillions of tons of water around you, but the water is frozen. And the only way to drink is to somehow heat the, or thaw the ice. So you need some sort of a boiler or a cooking device into which you put pieces of ice and you turn them into water, and then you can drink. Because the South Pole is actually a desert. The definition of desert is a place that doesn't receive any rain, and the South Pole is an ice desert. And so, in fact, it's very interesting. The burner that you see here in this slide was invented by Nansen. And it's a very clever burner because it has 2 layers. In the inner layer, you put your pot with food or whatever it is that you want to cook. And on the outer layer, you put broken ice. And then in the same time that you cook your food, you also thaw the ice and you prepare water. And this is very clever because you're saving energy this way, you're saving fuel. Now remember that everything that you take with you is something that you have to carry. You have to carry it on the sledges, on your back. So planning here is very important, and you cannot take anything that you don't really need. Now, in terms of light in your tent or in your igloo, you use something known as blubber. Blubber is the fat of seals or whales, and it's frozen solid, but you can put it in a little cup, which is made from some sort of bone, typically a whale bone, and then you light a match, the fat begins to burn, giving a terrible smell, by the way. And then you put, inside the oil, you put what is known as a wick, or in Hebrew, ptil, and you use a match to turn it on, and it provides a wonderful lighting and also very good source of heating, which is critically important. So that's how you get your fuel. Now let me say a few words about depots. Depots, this is something that I think many students know from Shvil Israel. When you go in Shvil Israel, in some places you have to put caches of water, especially in the desert, because otherwise you will run out of water. So someone, a friend, a relative, a Bedouin guide that you hire can put water for you in predetermined locations, and then when you get there, you use the water and you go on. So in English, these places are called depots. The caches are called depots. So what we see in this picture here is, actually this is a map of Amundsen's trip to the pole. And it's a little bit difficult to see on the slide, but along the way, this is 1,300 kilometers, of which you see the first 800 kilometers or so on this map. Every 100 kilometers or so, you dig a hole inside the ice. On your way to the pole, you dig a hole, and you put...
איצי, אני אצלצל לך יותר מאוחר, אני שומע איזה הרצאה, ואני לא רוצה להפסיד אותה.
Hold on.
Bye.
I have to mute everyone, and I forgot how to do it. Okay, so in any rate, just make sure that your microphones are muted. Hold on, maybe I figured out how to do it. Wait a minute, bear with me. Okay. All right, never mind. So, every 100 kilometers, you dig a hole in the ice and you put there food, fuel, some spare tents, equipment, and other things that you need for survival. You go another 100 kilometers, you make another depots, and so on. So altogether, you build about 10 such depots along the way. And you're going to use these supplies when you come back from the pole, right? Now, you have to understand that, once again, going to the pole is like going to the moon in more than one way. Because at the beginning, you have a group of maybe 50 people going at the beginning, and most of them are carrying equipment, and most of them are workers that you take in order to build your depots along the way. As you get closer and closer to the pole, people begin to go back, and the mission becomes smaller and smaller. And the last 500 kilometers or so will be done by only 3 or 4 people. And when these people will begin to go back, they will use the equipment that was deposited for them in the depots on the way to the pole. So not only you have to build the depot, you also have to very carefully mark the depot, and you do it with black flags, as you see in this photograph here, which you can easily discern on the ice. And so normally you will build a depot, and then you will create several circles of flags around the depot, one in a perimeter of 100 meters, and then maybe 500 meters, and then another kilometer or so. The better you mark your depots, the higher the chance that you will find them on your way back. By the way, as you go along, you mark the way. You mark it with flags. You mark it with the English word is cairns. The Hebrew word is, there's a word in Arabic which I forgot, rujum, which is, a small pile of in Israel, it's a small pile of rocks. In Antarctica, it's a small pile of ice that marks the route. Very important to mark it on your way back. the more bad is the weather, the more important becomes the marking that you laid on your way to the pole. So the depots are terribly important. And finally, as you can imagine, God, or actually I should say the devil, is in the details. Take for example goggles, something which is so basic on the ice. It's terribly important, not only because you're going to run into storms that are going to blind you, but also the sun can be blinding because of the effect of the ice. And so goggles are essential for survival. Now the British brought goggles with them, and the goggles were based on some combination of copper and glass. And these goggles are completely useless because they get frozen solid, and then you cannot use your goggles. Now, the Eskimos, on the other hand, use goggles which were made from a bone. And in this bone, they created small slits. And this was the perfect goggle to use on the ice. So once again, you see how a primitive technology can be much better than what was believed to be advanced technology. In general, knowing the Eskimo way of life was extremely important. And the Norwegian were very different than the British in their attitudes to the Eskimos. The British thought that Eskimos were like, backward, miserable people living somewhere at the outskirts of civilization. And there's really nothing that we, the British members of the British Empire, can possibly learn from these primitive savages. But the Norwegians adored Eskimos. For them, the Eskimos were the masters of their domain. And people like Nansen and Amundsen actually lived with the Eskimos for about a year or two in order to learn the Eskimo way of life. They learned how to build an igloo. They learned how to create moccasins and boots and how to fish in the ice, how to hunt. So they were very well prepared. What you see here in this slide are two wonderful books about the Eskimo way of life that I recommend that you take a look at if you have time or interest. And obviously, well, I have to find a way to mute everyone. So,
ירון, אני חושב שצריך אתה לא במיוט.
ירון צ'יק, mute yourself please.
כן, תעשה מיוט, יופי, תודה. מי עוד? Manage participants. Mute all, I got it. Okay. I managed to mute all of you. All the power to me. So, well, just like details are important, so is planning. And the mission is going to last 2-3 years. It's going to involve dozens of men, animals, several ships going to and fro. Everything has to ship in. There's nothing in Antarctica. If you forget something, big problem. You must bring everything with you. I'll give you an example. Well, maybe I'll do it in the next lecture because we're running out of time. But there are all sorts of crazy little details that are terribly important for your survival. So you have to bring all these things with you. You have several teams going, back and forth, marking and laying depots. By the way, during the 8 months of the winter, you begin to send teams of people to mark and lay the highway, so to speak, to the pole. And you begin the laborious process of laying depots. So you spend some of the winter month, when it's possible, to make a progress of about 500 kilometers and prepare the first leg of the journey for the rest of the group. You also make all sorts of, lateral journeys to learn the terrain, to find all sorts of ways of escape if you run into all sorts of trouble, maybe find another bay or another place where you can land the ship. All these things are terribly important. Also, packing and rationing your food is very important, because every day you have to get something like 4,000 calories in order to stay alive, or even more. And you cannot take too much equipment with you, right? So there's a trade-off to be planned and found. And what you see in this picture are members of the Scott expedition preparing what we call in Hebrew manot krav, or ration boxes. So they cut meat, and other supplies, they wait very carefully to make sure that every day you will get all the energy that you need, because otherwise you're going to die. We're reaching sort of the last 15 minutes or so of the lecture, so I want to give you some perspective on early milestones of polar exploration. So sometimes in the 18th century, James Cook crosses the Antarctic Circle and he sees Antarctica for the first time. He's the first person who actually views the Antarctic terrain. Ross, who gave his name to the Ross Sea, penetrates the Ross Ice about 100 years later, or less than 100 years later. Nansen crosses Greenland on the northern hemisphere. We'll say a few words about this later on. You know what, I'm going to skip through this slide because it's just a bunch of text, and I want to zero in on some of these milestones. Now, this slide I added about 2 hours ago, so you don't have it in your notes. This is the only slide that you don't have. It just gives you an idea of the size of Greenland, because I want to focus on our attention for a few minutes on Greenland in the northern hemisphere. So Greenland is huge. It's like half of North America, roughly. And in 1888, Nansen is the first person who manages to go through Greenland from one coast to another. It's a trip of about 1,200 kilometers, and he did it in grand style, because you see, the western coast of Greenland is populated with many Eskimo villages, like Nuuk, which is a big village. And the eastern part of Greenland is completely desolate. There's nothing there. So all the explorers before Nansen who tried to cross Greenland began their expedition in Nuuk, which made a lot of sense, right? Because that's where you have some sort of civilization and supplies, you can get guides. But think of it, when you start going from Nuuk to the east, there's always a tremendous temptation to turn around and go back. Whenever you run into trouble, say, yeah, gee, maybe we'll turn back. Well, Nansen had a better idea. Nansen landed himself and one more companion on the east side of Greenland, and he had no choice. He had to make it through, because if he through, he would die. So, this boldness of planning gives you a sort of, I think, a great example of the courage and planning and intelligence of these early explorers. So what you see here in the drawing is Nansen with his companion sitting behind the sledge. They had a little sail that they used in order to pick up wind and help the sledge go through. They had skis. The sledge could also operate as a boat when needed, a small boat. And then a few years later, Nansen achieves another fantastic achievement. He builds a very powerful ship called the Fram, F-R-A-M, which in Norwegian means forward. And he had a plan once again, Nansen was a very bold explorer. He had a plan to reach the North Pole by deliberately sticking his boat into the ice pack and hoping that the ice pack will somehow flow him and his boat as closer to the pole. And he was right. People before Nansen predicted that there is some sort of a circular undercurrent that slowly but surely brings you closer and closer to the pole. So basically what you see here, this is the famous Fram that was built intentionally to resist the pressure that I told you before. It's a big trade-off because you need to build a very heavy and wide boat, which will behave very nicely in the ice pack, but it's very difficult to navigate in open water. That's the trade-off, but he made this trade-off. And let me see if I have another, take a look at this map here. Basically, this is Norway around here. On the left side of the map, you see Norway. At the bottom, you see Siberia. At the top, you see the North Pole. So Nansen sailed out to Spitsbergen, which is a very northern island of Australia. And then from there, he deliberately stuck his boat into the ice, and the boat began to, float around. And then at some point, Nansen, let me try to find the right slide, zooming in. At some point, Nansen and his companion, whose name was Johannessen, you see the picture at the bottom of the slide, they set out from the ship, from the Fram. They put on their skis and they began skiing in the general direction of the pole. And you see the rest of the team paying them farewell. And they managed to get up to 500 kilometers from the pole, which was a world record. And they somehow managed also to get back, which was, a miracle of an achievement. Here you see the same sledges that you saw before acting as two little boats that they use, tied together. And it took them about a year and a half. And after a year and a half, all of a sudden, they showed up back in Spitsbergen, and everyone took them for dead. But in fact, they made it, and they went all the way back and announced that they came to, once again, 500 kilometers to the pole, based on their sextant measurements. So time is running out. I'd like to run a quick poll and ask you how good or bad this lecture was. So let me launch the poll and collect your results. Please answer the poll. Okay, so I'll end the poll and share the results with you. You know what, let me turn off the presentation. Hold on a minute. Stop share. Okay. So not too bad. Share results. As you see, most of the people had some problems, but nothing major. So I'm really relieved because at some point, I had the feeling that I'm talking to myself, and it's not so easy to give this lecture and at the same time to see all sorts of chats coming from people and all sorts of controls that I have to manage. But so far, so good. Let me run another little poll. So close this one, and one more poll. Stop sharing. Okay, I just want to know how you felt about this lecture. Was it a good experience or not? Wow, looking good. So brilliant. Sorry. I'll end the poll and share with you. So 100%. So, you know, we have a group of very polite students and learners around here. And I'm very glad to hear that you enjoyed the lecture. This lecture is just the beginning. You know, we haven't seen anything yet. And during the next 2 weeks, we'll spend time around the South Pole with Scott and Amundsen and Shackleton. And now that you know the basics of, you know, what it takes to survive on the ice and what it takes to get to the pole, we can get into the real stories, the real drama that took place in the South Pole. So it was great to have you. If you want to say something, you can send me email, and I'll see you next week. Until then, if you're a student in the course, please do the reading. If not, I think you may enjoy the reading also. So see you next week. Bye-bye.
תודה רבה.
תודה רבה, שמעון.
כיף, תודה לכם.
תודה רבה, שמעון.
שמעון, מה נעשה אם הקורונה תיגמר קודם? ההרצאות ימשיכו?
אני מבטיח.
שמעון, תודה רבה.
בכיף, ביי יעל.
תודה, ביי.
ביי יעל.
היה נהדר.
ביי ירון.
לא יודעת איך לכבות אותו. לא, כי פה זה המון אנשים, אני לא מצליחה להבין איפה
ביי שמעון, תודה.
ביי, בכיף. ביי מיכל.
הליב מיטים.
היי שמעון, נדבר.
תודה, ביי.
ביי, מזל טוב.
תודה. ביי ליאב.
פגש איתך פה למעלה. אתה לא רואה מה אני עושה.
כן, אני רואה, אתה בסן פרנסיסקו. היית מת.
לא בטוח ששם יותר טוב עכשיו.
אוקיי. ביי גליה.
תודה רבה, מזל טוב.
בכיף, ביי, תודה.
תן לנו הרצאה מהחלון, נפתח חלונות.
כן, אמרתי, תפתח את החלון, תשמע אותי יותר טוב. ביי חבר'ה. ביי עידית.
תודה רבה.
ביי מותק, תודה.
ביי ביי.